All right, hello everybody, and welcome to the Nerve Guys podcast, where we discuss movement through the lens of the brain. I am your host, James, and we are back after quite a long hiatus. I say we, unfortunately, it's going to be me riding solo for a while, but do feel free to leave Gareth some love in the comments, and maybe we can rope him back in for an episode or two. What do I need to say? This episode is brought to you by the Neuroband. That is a vision and balance training tool designed to develop posture, focus, and coordination. I'm going to talk a lot about that at the end, but yeah, please feel free to give me your money and receive a great product in return. This episode was due to be scheduled for January. It's kind of mid-April by now. So just to lay the foundation, we might hear some wood chippers, sawing, drilling, hammering, all kinds of different stuff. Everybody's been waiting to get on all their gardens and stuff around here since autumn. But I don't want to delay this any longer, because if I don't do it this week, I don't think it's gonna come out. And ironically, we're also going to be talking about a movie today that I believe was supposed to be a Christmas movie, so both of us are a little bit behind. We're going to be talking about the movie Novocaine. If you're not aware, basically a Christmas action comedy thriller, something like that, where the spin, it's kind of standard, guy has to go save girl from criminals, but the spin that they put on it is that he cannot feel any pain. He's been diagnosed with SEPA. That's a genetic condition where basically affects the types of nerve cells that you're able to grow, and because of that, you don't feel pain as a result. Sounds pretty awesome, right? Well, we're going to be chatting about that for obvious reasons. That's why it made it into the show. I saw the trailer for this, and to be honest, it looked like just total gratuitous gore and violence, and I really didn't think I was gonna enjoy watching this. But if I can give a bit of a review, first of all, hilarious. I feel like comedy writers, or like good comedy writers, just seem to appear out of the woodwork at Christmas time. It's almost like I don't know, they're bears or something, and they when they go hibernate, they just start writing jokes for Christmas movies. The only time I think in the last decade that I've heard people laugh out loud in the cinema has been at just random Christmas action flicks, and this was the same. So if you can handle the sheer levels of violence and gore, I'd recommend you go see it. And because of that, I'm going to keep this relatively spoiler-free. There may be some spoilers to do with the setup of the movie. So like in the first 20 minutes or so of the movie, there might be some things coming up. If you don't like that, then maybe this episode just isn't going to be for you. So with that in mind, let's talk about SEPA. So I guess we'll talk first of all about how it's portrayed in the movie, because I definitely went into this after seeing the trailer being like, all right, they've just picked a random condition and they're going to use it at the expense of, comedy, plot devices, but it's not going to bear any actual resemblance to people who deal with this condition. And if you see the trailer, it very much looks like that. Like every single clip from the trailer is just all about this hilarious joke that, bad guy does something to the hero and he's somehow not affected, but he has to pretend like he's affected by it because otherwise they're going to know that something's up. And so immediately, like, the red flag for me when I saw this was just the fact that the guy's an adult going into this. Life expectancy for somebody with this condition is super low. In the movie, I think they say it's 25. I was actually surprised by that. I've heard numbers thrown around that are at least half that number. If you get diagnosed with this condition, it's really unlikely that you're gonna see any amount of your adult life. And when you think about it, I think it's kind of easy to see why. Somebody who's impervious to pain sounds really awesome. Like, if I just couldn't feel pain, I could be getting on with all kinds of dangerous activities. I wouldn't have any fear about anything, and I would just be able to conquer the world. But we also have to remember that pain is indiscriminate. So when we want to avoid pain, we want to do it for our own selfish interests. We want the pain of, like, the workout we're doing just not to hurt so we can push ourselves harder. Or we want the pain that we experience from actually injuring ourselves to go away, because we tell ourselves, well, I would still do all the recovery. I would still rest myself as required, and then I could just go back. And if it just didn't hurt, that would be fine. But in reality, that's not what happens. If you can't feel pain, you have no idea when you've hurt yourself. Pain is like the signal to tell your body when to pay attention. So if you get pain in your shoulder, we've talked about this in other episodes and on other channels, but, pain in your shoulder doesn't mean there's a problem in your shoulder, but it does mean your brain is saying, hey, pay attention to your shoulder. You can ask it why, and it goes, I don't know. I just think it's important for you to pay attention to your shoulder. Maybe you've got an injury somewhere else that means moving your shoulder is actually going to aggravate that. It could be in your elbow, or it could be maybe on the other side of the body. So waving your arm around like this actually makes your hips wobble, and you've torn a ligament or something in your hip. And so your brain has decided that you're moving your shoulder more than you're moving your legs. So here's shoulder pain. What I'm trying to get to with that weird tangent is that pain is a really useful survival skill that your brain provides you with, and if you didn't feel pain, then you're going to run into problems very, very quickly. So pain doesn't always signal tissue damage. A lot of the time it does. And if you're actively damaging your body and you don't have a way to get that information to your brain, then things are going to decline very, very quickly. And if you couple that with the fact of, like, you could probably say now, if someone says, hey, by the way, you don't feel pain, you have to be extra careful. Well, try telling that to your 3-year-old, or try telling that to your toddler who hasn't learned to talk yet. And you can easily see that, that toddler is going to be a lot more carefree than another toddler that has a healthy functioning of pain. So they kind of address that right at the start of the movie, and I quite enjoyed that they covered all of the physiological and psychological aspects of what that kind of means for you. So, number one, you don't feel pain, you're going to get injured all the time. Enough accumulation of those injuries, that's going to kill you. Your life expectancy as a result is super low. And number two, from like a social perspective, number one, how do your parents know that you have this condition? Maybe it's a genetic disorder. So maybe for some people it's going to run in the family and they might have an inkling that, this is something to look out for. But before the kid can talk, like, how do you actually know when you're hurting your child? And so you're actually going to be acting in a much more fearful way, like before and after you realize your kid's got this condition. Your relationship with your kid is going to be much different from if it was just working healthily, like the pain response is working healthily. And then they also talked about, kids in school and bullies in school. So what would happen if you have this superpower that makes you essentially impervious to all damage from the eyes of a kid? We know there are consequences to tissue damage, but if you come in saying, hey man, you can drop a rock on my hand and I won't feel anything, well, then you've got this situation where now all these other little people who don't know what they're doing are going to start testing that out. And again, you see another strong reason why the life expectancy would tank pretty hard. So that was kind of nice about the movie, and that's also a nice analogy, I think, for when we're dealing with the brain and nervous system. And like myself as a movement coach, one of the things I've really tried to steer away from is to constantly talk about treating negative symptoms and like being the guy who makes all the negative things, the negative physicality that you have, go away, because it's important to realize that all of this stuff is really useful and really necessary. You can't go through life without experiencing negative things and bad things, because those things are required to make you survive. You're going to be sad no matter whether your life is, perfect or not. That's one of the big problems that a lot of people, first world people, suffer with psychologically. When we hear all these arguments about privilege and stuff like that, is, yeah, my problems aren't as bad as anyone else, so why do I still feel bad? And the answer is because your brain needs those emotions to be able to function. Same with pain. If you go for long enough without feeling pain, what happens if your brain forgets how to turn on those triggers again? So a lot of the time what you'll find is your brain will practice negative emotions, your brain will practice negative sensations like pain if you spend too long just sitting it out and not actually allowing those things to happen to you. Then the other cool thing that was addressed in the movie is that while we lock in on the inability to feel pain, some other things that come along with that is difficulty with temperature. So I'm probably not as familiar with SEPA as I would like to be for doing this episode, and I thought I would go and research it in depth first, but again, this has taken since Christmas, so I just decided to wing it. I'm not sure whether in all cases the inability to feel pain and the inability to feel temperature are linked, but I do know it's the case quite a lot of the time. And for me, that's really interesting, especially to talk about it, because pain and temperature, the pathways in the spine that deliver pain, so technically it's not pain, it's called nociception, but we'll leave that for another video. The pathways that deal with pain are right next to the pathways that deal with temperature, and it's possibly one of the reasons why we sometimes get huge I cannot talk today. Similarities between pain and temperature. For example, when you have some types of nerve pain, so when the nerve is like put in an awkward position or stretched too much, very often people associate a temperature with that. So they feel the actual pain that's happening, but they also feel like usually it's heat, like some kind of warm sensation. In some cases, I believe it can also be cold as well, but you will have a temperature associated with the pain. Similarly, it makes sense for temperature to want to be really closely associated with pain, because when things get too hot or too cold, that is always a problem. So there's temperatures that your body cannot tolerate, and when those temperatures are present, your brain wants you to suddenly pay attention to what's going on, and so as a result, it will tell you to, do something about this thing on your arm or your leg or whatever, and the way it does that is make it hurt. You're not going to necessarily react to the feeling of temperature. You are definitely going to react to the feeling of pain when it shows up somewhere. And there's other similarities as well. So, pain and temperature are two of the strongest senses where they're not technically emotions in their own right, but they kind of are. Like, you can't really have a temperature that doesn't change based on how you feel about it. So temperature is a sense, but how you feel about that temperature is what gives it its quality. And similarly with pain, so while temperature could be good or bad, pain is also a sense, but how you feel about the pain also influences the quality. So 2 examples for that, if I go out into the freezing cold, I feel cold, but I also don't like it. And the feeling of not liking the cold is very distinct from another example, let's say on a summer's day when I'm too hot and then somebody pours a freezing bucket of water over my head. So that bucket of water might actually be colder than what I was experiencing when I went outside in the winter, but because my body, it's refreshing for my body, so I actually get a positive emotional experience related to that, which I think is pretty cool. Pain, on the other hand, is more likely that you will associate pain as being bad most of the time, but we could even take, people who go to a flexibility or a contortion class, and they stretch out into their splits and they feel that pull of the muscle, and you call it discomfort or call it pain, whatever. The sensation is the same one that is eventually going to become pain later, so we'll just call it pain for now. And they feel that, but because they're conditioned to know, hey, when I go to this flexibility class, I do the thing that hurts, next week I come back and I can stretch further, then that actually feels kind of nice. On the other hand, if the muscle, if I was able to place some kind of device under your hamstrings that would stretch that muscle by the same amount, but just while you're sitting still, that would cause a very different kind of pain, because when your brain doesn't know why it's happening, it's going to be much more worried about it. And when it comes to chronic pain and pain conditions, when we're trying to rehabilitate from them, there is a lot of evidence to show that the biggest cause of your pain isn't the tissue damage or the postural issue or the kind of instigator of the problem. The thing that makes the pain worse and the thing that makes the pain last longer over time is the kind of little tailspin your emotions do when you start worrying about, number one, is this more serious than I think it is? That adds a ton of worry to it. Number two, is this going to affect my career? Is this going to affect my future? Will I ever be able to get out of this? All of those things start making this like negative loop of reinforcement that gets stronger and stronger every day that it persists. So your negative emotion gets worse and worse, and therefore the pain gets worse and worse. That was a long tangent again, but again, just to show that pain and temperature, very, very similar things in just packaged for a different context. So pain is around paying attention to your body, temperature is around the actual temperature that your body is surrounded by. But yeah, this SEPA condition, temperature is very often an issue that comes along with it, if not always. And again, that is something that, we take temperature very much for granted, but what would be the consequences of somebody who can't feel temperature? Well, number one, obviously you've got burns and things, and the movie focuses quite heavily on, skin, parts of the body being burned and not realizing. After a while, the tissue damage could potentially cause you to go into shock and change, some of your other physical responses. And that could be a good way to lower your life expectancy. But what's even more frequent is issues around body temperature itself. So if you can't perceive temperature, it's not just temperature from the outside, it's also temperature from the inside. And one of the big killers with SEPA is in babies. They get a fever, they get a temperature and stuff like that. Actually, they're going to start overheating. So it's a very good chance you're going to end up with a seizure just from the fact that your body is overheating too much. It's also going to switch off your ability to regulate body temperature. So, we think about, all right, well, what if we feel hot, or what if we feel too cold? That's like, put a jacket on, take a jacket off, but your body was already doing a ton of stuff to sort you out before it even came to your conscious attention. The big things would be sweating or shivering. So if you get too cold, one of the best ways to generate heat is to shiver. You make all the muscles contract and relax really, really fast, and the muscles produce heat, and that heat kind of slowly radiates out towards your extremities. And basically a really nice way to keep the core of your body warm and keep all of your organs warm. And then the other side of things, when you get too hot, then your body does a whole load of different things. So it'll move the blood vessels further to the extremities. You'll start to sweat, so the sweat will evaporate and that will cool you off. But if none of these things are happening, then both hypo and hyperthermia become real issues. There's a very good chance that you're going to overheat or just freeze. And again, it's something that we kind of overlook. So while I don't think I would say this movie is a really great example of like bringing awareness to a super chronic condition, because they take all sorts of liberties, and I don't think that the same movie about somebody with a much more common genetic condition would have gone down so well. It is just nice to see how it makes you think about all these things, and that's all like the primary concerns when it comes to SEPA. Then the next stage of things is, even if you make it through all of these hurdles, what kind of psychological toll is this inability to feel pain going to inflict on you? There's going to be a ton of issues that you're going to have because, number one, your relationship with your parents, as we've kind of already discussed, is going to be really weird. You know, if you speak to your primary caregiver and they're always telling you, don't do that, don't do that, don't do that, everything you're doing is wrong, they also look terrified half the time, that's gonna take its psychological toll. Also, your relationships with other people. So, you know, one of the ways that we understand other people is empathy, and our ability to see when it happens to us, how do we feel about it? And especially when it comes to like psychological issues, one of the best ways that we have of understanding that is we relate the thing that's going on into their head to a physical thing we can imagine. So when it comes to an inability to feel pain, I would imagine that you're not just going to be talking about physical pain. Hurting someone's feelings as well is going to be equally problematic, because you'll know what that feels like, but the only way that other people can explain it to you a lot of the time comes to do with like, you know, well, if this person came and slapped you on the wrist, how would you feel about it? And your answer is like, well, I would feel nothing, because I obviously will feel nothing. That's going to have its problems as well. Not to mention just the amount of kind of anxiety and fear of moving that you're going to have is going to lead to all sorts of other learning difficulties. So, not sure if I've got anything more to say about that. It was just to harvest the movie for its content value. I don't know. But yeah, just wanted to kind of chat through some of those things. I think it's interesting to think about the condition itself. It's also interesting to think about what kind of things you can learn from that about why we have these kind of responses in the first place. So, you know, why is pain important? Why do we have links with things like pain and temperature? Why is temperature important? And even, you know, how do our physical relationships depend on the information that we're getting from our body? If you have a body that creates a really good, accurate picture of the outside world and what's going on inside you at the same time, that's going to really help you to deal with all the problems that come up. In addition to this, the closer your body's sensations, so your sensory system dealing with the outside world and the inside world, you might get the world totally accurate, but if you're dealing with other people whose sensory systems are twisting the reality in a different way than you, that's going to be a problem as well. So that's why we can't communicate very well with animals, because they have totally different sensory systems. Sometimes we equate it with they're not as intelligent as us, but sometimes it's actually just, they have a high ability to sense certain things, just not the way that we sense them, and so it's almost impossible for us to understand how the other one would feel in any given circumstance. So I'm going to leave you on that note. Thank you very much for watching. It feels really good to be back. If you would like to support this podcast, I would highly recommend you check out the Neuroband. So this is a product created by myself and Gareth. It's all about an introduction to the nervous system, especially around your eyes and inner ear. So if you do any kind of work with us, you'll know that pretty much everything comes back to your vision, everything comes back to your balance, and to some extent, any kind of movement problem that you face, there is a way to address that through understanding the visual and balance systems. The Neuroband is basically a neat little way to get started on that and just discover, what kind of movements are important to the eyes, what kind of movements are important to the vestibular system. Yeah, you can purchase the course. We will ship the band to you to anywhere in the world, as long as that remains politically viable. And yeah, feel free to enjoy. So with that all out of the way, I'm looking forward to seeing you next week. And yeah, thanks for watching.